We're a non-partisan, independent community organisation, and we have no affiliation with any political party or with any politicians. Our aim really is to promote democracy, integrity, respect, accountability, equality and transparency in the political process. We know that galvanising as a group of people on shared issues is our best chance to ensure our collective voices are heard. We'd love you to share the word and spread the word around what we're doing and include as many Wentworth voters as possible. For this particular town hall, so our first town hall, we are focusing on what we think is one of the most urgent issues, the lack of political action on climate change. We know that in our lifetime, we will continue to see the negative effects of climate change, such as rising sea levels, hotter temperatures, and further periods of intense bushfires and smoke that will blanket our skies. So we're very fortunate today to hear from local Wentworth resident Blair Palese. Blair has 30 years experience as a director, senior manager, writer, editor and project manager with NGOs, media companies and government agencies addressing climate change, fossil fuel divestment, sustainability and environmental protection. She founded and ran 350.org Australia for 10 years and currently consults to a range of projects. Blair is going to share her thoughts on the political climate, no pun intended, the climate emergency and what needs to be done to reverse the trend. Over to you, Blair.
Thank you so much. And thanks so much to everybody. 20 people on our call is fantastic. Great way to start off. And I guess I've only been to sort of one group meeting with some of the gang. So we're really at the early end. And the reason for doing this was to really ask everybody who's interested to see if there's a bit of a groundswell of interest to do some of the same things that other electorates have done. Certainly, we know about Zolly's journey, but there's quite a few folk on the line who've doing the same kind of thinking in their electorate. So I think there's a real interest in trying to find ways to take back a bit of the electoral agenda before the election and put the issues that we care about on front and center. So the group that we met with just asked if I would do just a few slides to sort of put a bit of climate in perspective for us, since it certainly feels, first of all, like one of our biggest concerns as an issue, and also something that's really impacting the whole country, whether it's from bushfires or economically post the COVID virus, and where our money is going to in the, kind of the idea of a recovery spend, and not in a good way. So I'm just going to run you through very quickly some slides. This isn't really meant to be a giant big introduction with lots of facts and figures, but just to get us thinking about why this group was initially really concerned about climate, and the fact that Dave Sharma has, as our elected official, has said a few things over the time that we've had with him as representing us, but almost no, if any, action. And we're also all pretty highly aware that within the existing coalition government, there is no climate policy, and it's just not on their political agenda. So just one of the slides we've used at 350 over the last few years to simplify down the real challenge of climate. We know our planet's warming. There's just been news in the past couple of weeks. It's really alarming about Antarctica releasing methane for the first time on the seafloor, Antarctica and Siberia having fires. It's never happened before. Just lots of huge extreme weather events in Asia, and a heat wave in Washington, D.C. is apparently the hottest they've had for the length of time. So I'm just sharing with you, it's warming. We know that it's us, the carbon released by burning of fossil fuels is what's causing it. Scientists are pretty much in full agreement. We're really sure of that fact. There's no debate anymore about it being other causes, sunspots, etc. It's bad because of the speed that it's happening, but on the positive side, we can fix it. So we do have solutions to hand, and we should take some hope in the ability of, if we can push it politically for action to get some things done that would really make a difference. This looks a little scary, and I don't want to belabor the detail, but the idea of a carbon budget has been really beautifully delivered by scientists to tell us what we have to do in the time that we have. And this one is laid out in a nice graph by the Global Carbon Project, just showing the faster we act to reduce emissions, the quicker and more effective we can be, and also reducing the cost that it'll take to make that changeover. So it just shows you some of the scenarios that we're looking at. But if we go to 2025, we're already looking at it being really, really difficult to turn it around in the time that we have. So I just put this one up mostly for the frame that it gives us to think about climate, which is, if you listen to what all of our experts scientifically who've done this budget have said, is we simply cannot build any more coal, oil, or gas projects. So the challenge for us is that to turn the budget around and begin to reduce it slowly, we already have so much carbon loading from existing projects that anything new just makes it that much worse. So keep that in mind, of course, as you hear the coalition talking to us about investing in gas, for instance, as a green recovery option. Our biggest challenge is we currently have no national climate change policy. We literally don't have a single national policy that looks at how we will meet our Paris emissions reduction targets. And that's been going on for way too many years. So we've committed to Paris, but we have no plan for how to deliver it. We're also the biggest exporter in the world of coal and LNG, and our export emissions are rising 4.4% just from 2018 to 19. And companies are still pursuing new coal, oil, gas, terminals, fields, a whole range of things, because there's no real message from the government yet that says we have to transition off, and here's our plan to help you, companies that are in this, workers, et cetera, to do that and make the shift. But there's some good news, particularly in the thought of what the states and territories are doing. So in particular, just recently with the Northern Territory adding a net zero target of emissions, that basically puts every state and territory having such a target, which means that despite the federal government, we actually have a national goal to set a net zero target. So even though it's disjointed and sometimes the dates are different, at least there's an effort on the state level to try to aim for emissions reductions that can deliver that. There's also a huge race on by the states to see who can deliver as many renewable energy and large-scale battery projects as possible. So New South Wales just announced a really great new initiative around New England corridor that's really impressive. So these things are fantastic. States are acting. It's not everything we're going to need. And why would we want a federal plan? Well, it would give some kind of cohesion to how we go about it. It would possibly help fund things like transitioning workers in areas like coal and gas that will be impacted by that transition. But coal and gas demand is way down worldwide, and the COVID crisis has had an incredible impact at showing that not only can we do it, but we can do it fairly quickly, and that with the cost of renewables being so low, the speed to shifting now seems to be inevitable. So really it's a question of, how fast can we get this going and how can we encourage more of it? Finally, I do a little work for the C40, the Cities for Climate Action, and both Sydney and Melbourne are part of that process. And within that, there's a huge range of councils that are working together around the country on real on-the-ground deliverables on both renewable energy locally, reducing emissions, efficiency projects, and a whole range of other things. So take heart that our councils, including our own Waverley Council in particular, are doing some really fantastic projects. So it's not all bad news. Our challenge really, if you look at what I've just showed you, is that the federal government's blocking what really is already happening on the ground in most parts of Australia. So no need to belabor this too much, but to say that right now, renewables and battery storage are being rolled out all over the world, but at a really fast pace, but also in Australia. And I meant to add a little bullet point that said Australia is the largest household solar in the whole world. So, we're doing really well on this front, particularly given that we don't have any federal leadership. So green stimulus spending a little bit, placed well on these kind of low tech and low carbon and innovation projects would really make a difference, but we're just not seeing that at a federal level. So what can we do? There's loads of stuff going on out there in the world, even without protests and physical things happening. The divestment campaign I've worked on and off for 10 years, super effective. And I think we're at $12 trillion now worldwide committed to be divested out of fossil fuels. When companies like BlackRock start talking about divesting, the Norwegian Sovereign Fund, which is the biggest sovereign fund in the world, is divested everything out of coal, oil, and gas. Things are starting to move very, very quickly money-wise. So I just did an interview today with an expert on gas. basically, even despite efforts to continue to expand gas in Australia, all the major carbon players are pulling out of gas in Australia. So there's this real conflict of the government saying, you know, let's continue expanding on gas, but the market reality that that's just not where people are going. Companies, that is, large-scale companies. So it's not a good place to keep your money. If you haven't looked at where your money is and whether your super fund or your bank has money in coal, oil, and gas, it's a good idea to check. Happy to tell people more about or email you after some web links where you can find information if you're interested. And then, you know, investing in the good stuff. So renewables, regenerative agriculture, some innovation that's happening here and internationally. Lots of opportunities there, both in existing funds and to go with some of the kind of more creative outfits in Australia that are doing that kind of impact investing. You could join a local group. There are loads of them, fantastic ones in Sydney and even in our area. And I put up the Second Nature website, which is the Waverley Council one. There's fantastic resources there for what you can do at home and ideas for how to get involved. Voting, of course, on climate. One of our challenges in Australia, I think, is a lot of people care about it, but when it comes to going to the polls, it's just not front of their mind. And we've got to be a lot more vocal about it if we want our elected officials to pay attention to it. And joining a group like this or one of the local groups working on how to get this, you know, as climate is a major issue and then run up to the next election is why we're here tonight. And then, of course, loads of things you can do at home. So if you're more leaning toward that kind of stuff, lots of great resources out there. Again, I'd be happy to share some info with you if useful, including this one, which we were told about in a presentation that the Waverley Council did recently. Really great resource here called Low Carbon Living, where you can calculate your own emissions and then look for ideas on things you can do to reduce them. So that's kind of all I wanted to throw in front of you at this point. Obviously, loads of facts and figures about where we are on climate. It's not looking great, I have to say, but I try to keep optimistic to think that if we could remove our federal government to get the economic benefits of where we can and should be going, and where the rest of the world is going quite quickly on alternatives, innovation, energy systems. It could be done quickly here. The motivation is there, both from individuals, but also from companies. So our challenge is really to how do we speed it up? And I think that's the discussion some of us would love to have tonight. And if there's a kind of ongoing process that we might want to be involved in to see how Wentworth can play a part in that. So thank you very much. I would say yes, we are. But except that, that's true on the sense of like big, giant switching, and maybe where we're at worry of being left behind is in our region. So we're doing pretty well in Australia. I just mentioned something called power purchase agreements. So this is when a company says the cost of energy is too expensive. Funnily enough, one of the reasons energy is so expensive in Australia is that we have structured our gas market to all go overseas where we get more money for it. So that means that we're sometimes buying it back at really high cost, where we're trying to compete with our own export market to pay for the gas that's produced here. It's an example of sort of why a federal plan that actually looks at the bigger picture of our own energy costs and our energy market, but where and how we transition would make good sense. So where we really are left behind are things like how could we play a big role, say, in Southeast Asia at taking everything we've learned about power purchase agreements, renewable energies, how to do deals where buyers and users of energy or producers of energy and buyers can directly buy for renewable projects. Which has been super successful in Australia. We're one of the fastest countries taking up that kind of approach where companies like Telstra say, I'm going to lock in a price for power by going directly to a producer of solar and battery storage. And I'm going to lock in a price for 10 years. But that means that the builder of that solar project can say, I have a guaranteed buyer. I'm going to go ahead and set that project up. So that's happening all over. It's a great example of where we're not being left behind. But it is an example of, hey, why don't we think about doing this in a bigger way and export our knowledge, our technology, our systems, how we do energy management. That's going to take a little bit more management by the federal government, and we're not getting that. I just mentioned one other thing. Maybe you've seen something that Mike Cannon-Brooks has put up called It's a project where we would produce renewable energy and we would pipeline it to Singapore, right? Pretty exciting. And it's off and running. It's already underway as a project that a bunch of people came together and decided they were going to try and make it work. Singapore is interested. We could do a whole lot more of that, but it takes a real leadership at the top, not even to make it financial, like give tax breaks, but just to get out of the way, to not continue to say it's all about coal, oil, and gas. To say, if you really put your hand on your heart and say, we want to be a market-driven economy, then get out of the way and watch renewables take off. Because at this point, they're so cheap and so cheap to set up that it's, without a doubt, 100% more efficient. You can put the power where you want it. You can use the system that you need. You can manage it in a million different ways that you can't do with a giant, say, coal-fired power plant. So it makes great sense, but we have not only no kind of sense of guaranteed by the federal government that they will let it go without punishing it. I mean, I kid you not, it's been hit so hard over the last 20 years that renewables have set up and gone out of business and moved overseas. They've done it again and again and again because government continues to kind of hit them with challenges. So it's time to, just from the economic point of view, even if you don't care about the climate impacts or what we're leaving for our children, we have no economic plan post-fossil fuels, and that's a dereliction of leadership federally. Every other country in the world is now looking at how they just let the leashes off, and let this stuff go and provide at least enough surety that projects can get started in a very new and innovative way without being punished, whether it's taxes, whether it's the constant threats for energy users to say, we're going to start charging you for producing solar energy, all of these things. We don't have a plan. It's not hard to look to other countries and see it being done well. There are many who are doing it very, very well. And some of it's very soft touch. It's not heavily subsidized stuff. It's really just saying, we're not going to punish you. We're going to let you be even with existing energy sources. So that's, my answer to that. Will we get left behind? Quite possibly if we don't pull our thumb out soon and say federally, we want to be a leader in our region and we want to play in the market internationally, then we have to play a very different game. And sorry to go on, just one last thing. I would guarantee you that the nations who are leading right now will start thinking about sanctions, because if Australia does nothing to curb its emissions and doesn't meet its Paris targets, but Germany bends over backwards to deliver, or Sweden, or the UK, after a while, they're going to get sick of saying, why am I doing this? And why am I putting the effort and the money in when Australia over here isn't lifting its game? And we're going to stop buying from you, whatever it is. It's something that will start to be talked about. So there's also the economic stick that may come our way by countries that just say, we're going to choose to buy from countries that are doing the good stuff because we want to be in competition with those countries that are doing the same kind of lifting that we're doing to make an effort on climate change. It's an ideology. Let's be very clear. If this was a market-driven government, we would not be seeing a gas recovery. We would not be seeing, it makes absolutely zero cost sense economically. It's a bad investment. I mean, it's throwing our taxpayer money, good money after bad. We cannot prop up gas and coal and oil. The market has spoken through Paris, and countries are delivering on not using coal, oil, and gas, which means the market will go. So no matter how much money Scott Morrison wants to throw at a gas recovery, we can't save the gas market. So what do we do to get the rose box out of the way? Well, I think the first thing is for all of us to vocalize what is our economic plan post-fossil fuels, Scott Morrison? Because, our kids are going to go looking for jobs and they're not going to be in digging up coal and setting up coal seam gas projects. So I think it's a valid question for us all to be largely going to our government elected officials, whether they are, Dave Sharma, or whether they're in Canberra, people we don't know. We need to be making trips in to demand, what's the plan? That's one. Two, we need to be joining forces with progressive business to say, we want more, we want a plan, and we're going to vote on it. And as businesses, we're going to push in every possible way for you to get out of the way of the good stuff that could and should come along. Those are a couple, but I'm hoping this group, we can also start brainstorming a bit about what we can come up with by way of removing the roadblocks and pushing for a better outcome for Australia. Yeah, green steel is a perfect one because we're such a big steel producer and there's a lot of interest. And also green hydrogen is another new growth area. It's got other challenges, but it still has real potential. Everyone in the world is looking for a way to make steel without metallurgical coal. We have lots of it, but we could come up with an alternative. We have a lot of smart people focused on mining who could really try. Summertime, it's coming around again, folks. I was just in the whole region around Cobargo. They had some rain in February and then they've had no rain. They've had one other day when it rained. So if we think the drought is broken or that fire problem isn't coming back again, it impacted the entire east coast of Australia. The air quality issue was huge. It's a human health issue for Australia. We had the same problem in South Australia, West Australia. There were fires in rainforest areas in Queensland that have never been dry enough to have a fire before. So, dereliction of duty. We have no crisis management plan for climate impacts in Australia because our government doesn't accept that we have a climate change challenge. So, dereliction of duty number 2, besides economic, is no one's going to protect us. And when the fires did happen, there was no national strategy to link up emergency services across state lines. So they were all doing that on the fly. I expect a whole lot more from my federal government. I'm paying a lot of taxes and I'm getting nothing when it comes to protecting, us here and our air quality and our health in Sydney, let alone the poor people in Cobargo who've lost houses, farmers who've lost everything. It's a huge issue. So maybe one issue that we could all talk about too is how we in the city can connect up better with rural communities who are facing much bigger climate impact challenges. And how do we support each other as we head toward the next election? Because I think the government's done a terribly good job at wedging urban people from country people, even though we're all dependent on each other. So a better way to work together with some other local groups to put this on the agenda would be really, really fantastic.
Blair, just on that point, I think it's really interesting because the timing of COVID has been so interesting in seeing how the government has responded to that, how they've galvanised around it, created a task force, built a strategy and dealt with the pandemic in a way that's systematic, clear, communicate, wrap their arms around the community, said we're all in it together. And that has blown me away in so many ways. What's your take? Because if the government could do that around climate change, I don't think we would be here in this situation. It seems to be something that's so silent, yet we are so concerned.
Yeah, it's true. And I think we'd all agree, if you can accept the science around the pandemic, then why aren't we accepting the science around climate change? And maybe that's another message we should all be delivering to our elected officials. The science is real, it's just as real. And in fact, the impacts played out in such a terrifying, expensive way, and lives were lost, wildlife was lost, farmland and people's communities were lost. So it's just as bad. And at the risk of sounding terribly negative, and I try very hard not to, but this climate issue will make the pandemic look like nothing. It will make it look like it was so easy in Australia, because what we see coming as of today's report out of UNSW was up to 4.6 degrees of warming. It's an unlivable planet. So it's impossible to hear those scientific reports coming, and they come every day, and not say that our response to the climate problem must be at least as big and as unified as our response to the pandemic. And if we can do it for one, why can't we do it for the other? I don't. I just think everyone loves to say market's great. And it's a fantastic thing that the market is filling the void. But the problem are things like our energy grid is very, very old.
Mm.
And if you want to shift from big giant coal-fired power coming from the Hunter Valley to distributed renewables and battery storage, that will take a plan for our national energy grid, working with states to sort that out, to allow good places where, you know, renewable hubs can actually input into the grid. That's just an example of why we need some federal leadership. And again, I'm not talking about the government taking over with some big money spend on climate. I'm talking about them getting out of the way and giving a steer. That's really all we need at this point, because business and communities and councils and states have been so good at filling that void. The truth is, at this point, what we're lacking is the national government getting out of the way, or at least saying they will positively convene states to work together to find solutions.
Another question here, in just terms of how important is community action. So, you know, this group, we're new. It'd be great to kind of get your view and understanding of how important this sort of movement is in ensuring, like climate action and other issues, as we mentioned before, get surfaced properly at a federal level.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that gives me the most hope is watching someone like Zali work so hard out of where she is to effectively get elected, and then really just keep the pressure on the issues that she promised she would. So that move for independence is really interesting, which isn't to say we stand a chance of getting an independent up in Wentworth. I don't know, but it's such a hardcore liberal seat. It's very hard to imagine, but that doesn't mean we can't put pressure on, because there are lots of us that care about this issue in Wentworth. And my feeling is most of us have really gotten to the point where we think we don't stand a chance of either getting a meeting or being heard, but we haven't really tried. And so I'd say unify with some of these other groups that are independent groups that are working all over, that aren't party aligned, that are interested in a few key issues, and then let's share ideas and really get active together and keep that pressure on. Now, I know it's an exhausting thing, and this isn't somebody's full-time job in this group, but if we all committed, say, to doing one thing a month, and our group was big enough, that pressure would just continue to go on. And, you know, it's something we could see building between now and the time of the election. So I think there's huge scope there. And there are also some great things like, there's an organization that just trains up and organizes people when they go to Canberra to help them get in, get meetings, and go visit elected officials, and just don't feel scared by it, or I'm not good enough, or I don't know the issue well enough, but to train up and be prepared enough to just talk about what you care about, and not being afraid to turn up there, as well as the electorate offices here in Wentworth.
Blair, a question from me, and I'm not really sure, to be honest, about, you know, the sort of the percentage of our kind of the Wentworth electorate that are despondent to the climate science. You know, Kath and I were having a chat before everyone joined, that we had a few negative comments on the website about this initiative, and it often kind of, you know, just takes the optimism away when you have people who are coming forward with views that of not accepting the climate science. How do you respond to that? How do you sort of make sense of that? I expect we're going to see more of it as we become more and more vocal. And as you mentioned, it's a heavy Liberal seat, and we've got some challenges at a federal level around accepting this climate science. So, you know, what's your thoughts on how we move on this?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is don't be discouraged, and two, the fossil fuel industry is incredibly well organized. So we're going to get all kinds of things in response to asking questions that are absolutely valid questions for us in our electorate. So you got to be a little bit, encouraged by the thought that we have to do this, and we have to stand up to that if we want it put in its place. And if we want it out of our democracy, and we feel like we as voters should have a say in the issues that we care about, then it's absolutely our right to ask questions and to push and to say what it is we want. And secondly, or thirdly, I would say within this group, there are probably a couple people who are fearless and will be happy to go head to head, and it won't be all of us, and that's okay. So find when we put together some things to do, let's find the things that we feel comfortable, that we're good at and we want to do, and really feel okay about not being the person who has to fight the fight with the fossil fuel industry. There'll be people in this group who say, I'm up for that. I got it, or I do something professionally that lends itself to knowing how to do those kind of debates and discussions. Within the group, as we form, I think we'll find lots of different talent, and we just need to use that well. We should all feel comfortable saying what we do and don't want to be doing in it. There's no pressure for everybody to be, really big activists by any stretch of the imagination. Some people may be good at the small stuff. Some people may be good at organizing a local community how-to group on what composting or whatever you want to do at home. Some people might be absolutely, I want to host a debate. I want Dave Sharma and some other locals to get together and debate what's standing in our way and why aren't we doing this. So I think it's that. Let's find within the group that we pull together, let's find the skills we need and feel confident that we can cope with whatever comes our way.
Thanks so much, Blair. You've got so many interesting things to tell us and such a lot of guidance for us as well. Not so much a question, but more in terms of how this group is going to go forward. It is along lines around protecting or upholding robust democratic processes. So climate action is one of the biggest issues that a lot of us are concerned about, and the lack of positive action in that space over the last decade or so has been very concerning for a lot of us. But there are other issues as well that are concerning Wentworth voters to do with how the federal parliament is operating. I mean, we've got very unusual circumstances at the moment with the COVID crisis, and that's definitely having a very significant impact on the way that the parliament is operating, as well as what the states are dealing with and what individual voters are dealing with as well. One of the things that we are hoping to do is to engage throughout the electorate over the next few months in smaller groups, sort of in the kitchen table model that's been rolled out in other electorates, to really get discussions happening across the electorate with all voters who want to discuss all of the issues that they're worried about. And other issues, for example, that I'm very concerned about include the crackdown on press freedom, the concerns around why the federal ICAC legislation isn't being passed. These are real democratic questions which I am very concerned about. How do you see us going forward and engaging with the electorate and building this group in a positive way to try to engage as many people as possible?
I'd open that to the group and say, maybe we could quickly discuss how we'd like to work next. Maybe an email of your top 3 issues of concern, and we could look for some common ground. We've done that a little bit amongst the small initial group, but it would be great to see if there's some other things that we all share opinions about. And, maybe a survey could be done of everyone who's responded to this, which is 3 things you care most about, 3 actions you might be interested in taking part in or being part of a group that does it. And we could start beginning to form some subgroups that do some things and some regular meetings where we share steps and a plan looking ahead. Is that a thought for how to go?
One thought that I have is that it would be good to really undertake a fact-finding mission of those issues and really getting out into the community and having those kitchen table discussions and understand what people want, what action they want taken and what their concerns are. I think it's, I think it will pay dividends both from having a genuine understanding of what people are concerned about locally, but also being able to demonstrate that you've gone through that process. I think will give any other action subsequently credibility, and it will also create a lot of connectivity within the electorate so that you can identify people through that process who may be able to contribute. So I would say phase 1 should really be having those discussions before moving on to other actions.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things that we've talked about and thought about a little bit is, we're all on this call because we care very much about specifically climate action and other issues as well. But in order to really bring the conversation to Dave Sharma and to ask him to do anything, or to show, any kind of gaps between what he's doing and what voters want, we do need to do that work. We do need to understand and canvass the views of the voters in Wentworth, and now's as good a time as any to try to start to do that.
I think the younger people are much more amenable to climate change, etc., rather than older, entrenched thinking. I'd be very interested in that.
While younger people tend to be pretty good on climate, one thing we could very much look at is making sure they're registered to vote if they're new to the rolls. So one thing that happens over and over again is they miss the election. They don't register in time, even though they're legally required to. So an early thing to do, because it's totally non-denominational, you're not picking an issue even, is to just use our outreach to make sure we're speaking to, maybe through Fridays for Future or other local Wentworth-based groups, to make sure kids know how to do it, what the deadlines are, and how to make it easy for them so that when the election comes, they're actually heard. It's a real challenge in Australia because a lot of kids are like, yeah, I'll get around to that, but then they never do, and they miss the window, and they do care about the issue, but if you're not organized, your vote may not make it in time.
If we've got any other questions from the group before, I think Kath's just going to wrap up with next steps from here.
Yeah, I've sort of lost track of the questions on the chat, but if there's anything on there that we've not answered yet, then we'll try to come back to people by email, or we can maybe pick them up at the next town hall. So yeah, just to finish up, thank you very much for your time this evening. Everyone's very busy and there's lots of things demanding our attention at the moment. But this is, we hope, going to be the beginning of a really exciting project in Wentworth. We are very hopeful that we'll be able to engage people in a really positive way. And we will be running another town hall at the end of August. So our idea is to try to run them every 5 to 6 weeks, just to keep people informed of what's going on and to expand the group and to provide an opportunity for people to catch up and to discuss things, to ask questions, to come up with ideas, to brainstorm. Whatever it is really, and we're very amenable to suggestions of how to run the sessions. We are happy to receive suggestions for speakers to talk at these sessions, or we can just have a brainstorming session about issues we're concerned about. It's really a kind of focal point for the whole group to come together and stay in touch and keep the motivation and the momentum going. So keep watching out on the Facebook page and make sure you're following us on the Facebook page. We do have a Twitter page as well. If you can follow us there, that will become more active, I guess, as we've got more things happening and there's larger numbers of people following us. We'll be able to get a bit more active on social media and be a bit clearer about what our direction is. And obviously, being in such early stages, we are very much listening to everybody for suggestions for how to move things forward. So please don't be shy about sending us an email, making suggestions, asking questions. Please do send those emails through. So our aim is to grow the group to we'd like to aim for 1,000 people in the group by the end of the year. We're hoping that'll be achievable, and we really do want to make sure we have a significant or sufficient number of Wentworth voters in our group to make our voice heard. And it's likely that there's going to be a lot of different views within that group, and how we manage that will be a challenge as we go along. But it's going to be interesting to see what the issues of concern are for people and the depth of concern that people have for specific issues, and how we go ahead to communicate with Dave. If you've found this useful, or if you've got other connections in Wentworth, please let them know and spread the word. We're doing our best for democracy here. We want to have a robust, healthy democratic system. Well, that's what we have been born into, and we hope that we will leave the same system for our kids. But we do need to look after it. We've got some work to do, because there's a lot of pressure on the democratic processes all around the world at the moment. So it feels good to be doing something to try to help sustain our democracy. Yeah. Thanks again for your time, and please do email us with any other questions, and we hope to see you at the next town hall.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.